So Jen Psaki, because of that enthusiasm that Jim was just talking about in polling among Democrats, we've got an entirely different convention, obviously, next week in Chicago than we would have had a month ago, where there was, a lot of consternation, let's say, about the candidate. Joe Biden, the president of the United States, now speaking on Monday instead of Thursday, where he would have been as the nominee, of course. Kamala Harris on Thursday. What should you expect, and what do you think this DNC needs to accomplish for Democrats?
Sure. Well, I spent the day in Chicago yesterday, Willie, at the United Center. I also spent some time with the governor. I had a shot of Mayork with him, which is I don't recommend.
It's tough stuff.
But he's quite excited about next week. And the interesting thing about the convention, to your point, is there are some things that will feel different and be different. There hasn't been a convention like this with people attending in 8 years, right, because of COVID. And, of course, with Vice President Harris at the top of the ticket, it means things like AKA her sorority, the Divine Nine, they're going to be celebrated in the room. There's never been a nominee that's been a member of the Divine Nine. So some things will feel different. Maybe we'll see some camo hats for Tim Walz, right? They also have a stage that is dedicated just to creators, all right? People who do content for social media platforms. That's never been done before. But there'll still be speeches and balloons and things like that. For Harris, to John Heileman's point, a lot of people have gotten to know her a little bit over the last couple of weeks. There's a lot of joy around her campaign, which I think is a big factor of why people are excited. Same with Tim Walz. This is her best opportunity between now and November to introduce herself to an even wider swath of the public. So for her, that's about a couple of things. Conveying what her bio is, talking about a future-looking message, and drawing the contrast with Donald Trump. And it's really what the balance is in her speech. I think it's going to be more the first two than the last third of that. But this is a huge moment for her next week. And all of the convention builds up to her. But the piece that is also different, and you touched on this, is that Joe Biden, the president of the United States, who's beloved in the party, is speaking on Monday night. And there's a lot of excitement. A lot of people are feeling quite emotional about that. You could see that in people's faces yesterday when I was at the United Center. A lot of people are flying in for that. There's going to be a staff party, I hear, after that. But that's going to be a big moment on Monday night, too. Standing ovation, I would expect. And people really want to celebrate the president, given the decision he made and all of his accomplishments over the course of his term.
It's going to be quite a night, quite a week. You look at that lineup. Doris, I'd love for you to talk about this election and one that you saw up close, and there's so many parallels. 1968, you have LBJ dropping out in March, and then chaos. You have the chaos of Martin Luther King being killed a week or so later. Bobby Kennedy runs. He's assassinated June 6th. The Chicago Convention, absolute chaos. George Wallace jumps in. He splits the New Deal coalition, especially in the South. And Humphrey ends up losing. By the way, Humphrey, the only Democratic nominee to skip the primary process until Kamala Harris. So with all of that as a historical backdrop, the question is, how does Kamala Harris avoid some of the pitfalls of 1968?
Well, I think we've got to hope that we've learned from history. I mean, one of the things that happened in 1968 was they were aware that the anti-war protesters would be there. They didn't know how many would be there. The police were over-responding to it. And the scenes of bloody confrontations between the police and the protesters were side by side on Humphrey's nomination night. So the police hopefully are better trained this time. Permits have been given. Hopefully they're keeping them in certain places. And we can learn from history. There's an echo and a ghost, really, of 1968 and Grant Park and what happened there. But there's another Grant Park echo that we got to hope for, and that was when Obama took the nomination and won the election, and he spoke in Grant Park. And that was a moment when the entire country had felt a sense of having moved forward by having produced the first Black American president. And that was a moment of joy. So let's hope that we've learned from history, and it doesn't have to be the echo of 68. It can be the echo of 2008 instead in Grant Park.
Talk about what you've seen, along with the rest of America, over the past 3-4 weeks. Any parallels for you in recent American political history of a candidate who undervalued by members of her own party, undervalued even by members of her own administration, coming out and overperforming the way she has thus far?
Well, you see the candidate going through the primary process, and because that didn't happen with Kamala Harris, she appeared really as a new person to so many of us who had seen her as vice president, but not really seen her in front of crowds in the same way that we have. So it's almost like a change candidate appeared onto the horizon, which is very different, even though she's part of the incumbency of the presidency. So she's got both the value of the resources of the presidency behind her and the idea that she's a change candidate. I don't think we've seen anything like it for a long period of time, precisely because we've normally seen those people since 1968 going through the primary process. So we know them already. They've been vetted. They've made their mistakes. They've done well. But all of a sudden, she appears like a new person. It's really something that we haven't seen in history.
By the way, and I'm comparing Kamala Harris to none of the people I'm about to mention, because we don't know what her story is going to look like, and if she wins, what her presidency would look like. It is, though, fascinating, though, that you've seen this transformation among people on the inside of the Democratic Party, especially, and a lot of independent voters, that Kamala Harris has grown quickly before their eyes. And I'm just reminded every time I read the horrific quotes of what contemporaries said about, well, you could name any president, really, but what contemporaries said about Abraham Lincoln, what contemporaries of FDR said, that FDR was this shallow, empty suit, a sort of a playboy type of guy that was just too shallow and weak to get to the White House. Ronald Reagan, a B-list actor, a failed actor, just seen as a joke. I mean, Ronald Reagan was a punchline, I remember, of Archie Bunker. And I think it was like end of 1976, beginning of 1977. And I could go down the list of all of these people. You're looking at Ronald Reagan there. And again, the guy was just considered an absolute joke when he started running in 1980 by most people in the media and the elites. And along with FDR, those two presidents probably did more to define the 20th century than any two presidents.
But you know what's interesting, Joe? I mean, even Ronald Reagan in 1976, when he lost that race to Gerald Ford, and Gerald Ford unexpectedly invited him to give a talk after the nomination had gone to Ford. And Reagan came on stage. And I don't know why he did that. He was hoping there'd be unity. But Reagan came on stage, and he essentially gave what would have been his acceptance speech had he won the nomination. And it was incredible. It was beautiful. And I remember watching that and feeling a sense of, oh, my God, he should have won. And he set a tone then on television that allowed people to say, he's the one. He's the future of the Republican Party. And 4 years later, he's the nominee. I mean, the same thing happened with John Kennedy. That was my first convention that I ever watched. In 1956, my mother called me down. I was reading. She said, you've got to come down. This young Massachusetts senator, an Irish Catholic, we were Catholic, is about to be nominated for vice president. Adlai Stevenson had crazily thrown the vice presidential nomination open to the delegates. Lyndon Johnson said it was the goddamnest stupid thing he'd ever heard to give up power. And John Kennedy, 39 years old, was second, almost winning that nomination, which Estes Kefauver finally won. And then he gave a sort of concession speech. And I remember looking at him. He looked different from everybody else. He had a full head of hair. He wasn't bald like the other guys. He was thin. He was tanned. He was handsome. And he made a national journey that night. And that those impressions lingered until 4 years later, he's the nominee. So it happens. It happened with Obama in 2004. He's asked to give the keynote address, and he gives such an extraordinary address. There's not a liberal America. There's not a conservative America. There's the United States of America, not a black America, not a white America, the United States of America. You know, and we in the blue states worship God. We in the blue states are Little League champions. We have friends who are gay in the red states. It was just what the country wanted to hear. And suddenly he emerged on the scene. So one of the things I'm looking for this next week is who will be the young people who we don't really think about now, whether they give a keynote, whether they give a nomination, and they might be the future leaders of America.